There's a specific kind of person who never raises their voice in an argument, who says, "I'm fine," and somehow means it, right up until the moment they don't. Who can sit through a funeral, a diagnosis, a betrayal, a divorce, dry-eyed and steady, the one everyone else leans on. And then, months later, breaks over something absurdly small. A dropped plate, a comment said in the wrong tone, a parking spot someone else took. They break. Not sad, exactly. Not upset, in the normal sense. Broken, in a way that surprises even them. And the question almost nobody asks in that moment is the one that actually matters. Where did all of it go before this? Curious how a person can carry grief, humiliation, disappointment, fear, carry all of it without a single crack showing, and then come apart over something that, on its own, means almost nothing at all. That's not weakness. And it's not really about the plate or the tone or the parking spot. It's about what happens to feeling when it isn't given anywhere to go. And here's what's important to understand before we go any further. Emotion doesn't disappear just because it's not shown. It doesn't evaporate the way a held breath does the moment you finally let it out. It gets stored in the body, in the nervous system, in a kind of internal ledger that keeps a running total whether you're checking it or not. Every unexpressed moment adds a line. And ledgers eventually get settled, usually at a time that has nothing to do with any single entry. Now, there are a few distinct types of people who do this. And once you see the differences between them, you start recognizing which one you are, or which one raised you. The first type is what you could call the quiet container. This is the person who doesn't suppress emotion because they're cold inside. They suppress it because somewhere along the way, they learned that expressing it made things worse. Not once. Repeatedly. Enough times that the lesson stuck deep, without them ever deciding to learn it. Psychologist James Gross, at Stanford University, has spent decades studying how people regulate emotion, and one of his central findings involves something he calls expressive suppression, the act of inhibiting the outward signs of a feeling while the internal experience keeps running underneath, mostly unchanged. Research from Gross and his colleagues suggests that suppression doesn't actually reduce what a person feels. It just hides it. The heart rate stays elevated. The stress response keeps firing quietly. The face goes still, but the body never gets the memo. And here's the thing. That gap between what shows on the outside and what's actually happening inside is exactly where the quiet container lives. Every single day, for years, sometimes decades, without anyone around them noticing the distance between the two. Apply that to the person who never cries at the funeral. Their calm isn't evidence that they're unaffected. It's evidence that they've gotten extremely good at one specific skill, keeping the outside still while the inside stays in motion. And that skill, little by little, starts to look like personality. People start calling them the strong one. And eventually, they start believing it too. But here's what's interesting. Studies comparing expressive suppression to a different strategy, cognitive reappraisal, where a person changes how they interpret a situation instead of just hiding their reaction to it, consistently point in one direction. Reappraisal tends to be associated with better emotional and social outcomes over time. Chronic suppression, on the other hand, is associated with more strain on relationships and on the body itself in ways that accumulate quietly enough to go unnoticed until they don't. Which means the quiet container isn't just holding feelings in. They're paying for it in a currency nobody around them can see. And there's a shadow side worth naming here, because it complicates the story. Not everyone who looks like a quiet container actually is one. Some people have simply learned, correctly, that a given moment isn't the right one to unload in: a meeting, a hospital waiting room, a child's birthday party. Knowing when to hold something briefly isn't the same pattern as never letting it out at all. The difference isn't in the holding. It's in whether there's ever a later moment where the feeling finally gets somewhere to land. Think about the quiet container you know. Maybe it's you. The one who handled the layoff, the diagnosis, the funeral arrangements, without a visible wobble. People praised that composure, called it grace, called it strength, and maybe it was in the moment. But grace under pressure was never designed to be a permanent address. It was supposed to be a temporary shelter, not somewhere a person moves in and stays for years. Before this video ends, I want you to hear something. The weight you carry. from holding everything in, from staying composed for people who never ask what it costs you. That's not a character flaw. That's a pattern. And patterns have origins. And things that have origins can be understood. I went much deeper into this than I can cover in one video. Everything I know about where this comes from, and what starts to shift when you finally see it clearly, it's in the description. And in the first pinned comment, whenever you're ready. But then there are the other people. And this is a different pattern entirely. The second type isn't quiet at all on the surface. This is the over-functioning performer. The one who keeps moving, keeps producing, keeps showing up early, staying late, managing everyone else's crisis while their own goes completely unmentioned. They don't look like someone suppressing anything. They look like someone who simply has it together better than everyone else in the room. And that makes sense, because functioning is the mask here, not stillness. Writer and psychologist James Pennebaker, at the University of Texas at Austin, spent much of his career studying what happens when people keep painful experiences unspoken instead of expressing or processing them. His research on inhibition suggests that actively holding back the expression of an emotional experience takes ongoing physiological effort, and that this effort, sustained over time, connects with measurable strain on the body, including markers linked to stress. Pennebaker's later work on expressive writing grew directly out of this. The idea that putting a difficult experience into words, even privately, tends to reduce the physiological cost of carrying it in silence. Now flip it. The over-functioning performer isn't avoiding the effort of feeling. They're just spending all of it somewhere else, on tasks, on other people, on being needed. It's not that the emotion disappears while they're being useful. It's that being useful is the only channel they've ever built for that energy to move through. And little by little, without realizing it, the channel becomes the whole identity. Ask them who they are without a task in front of them, without someone who needs saving, and there's often a long pause before an answer comes. That makes sense too, because if you've spent years proving your worth through output, rest doesn't feel restful. It feels like exposure. But there's something else, something you feel but can't always explain. The over-functioning performer's breaking point rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It looks like getting unusually irritated over a scheduling conflict, or crying out of nowhere during a commercial, or feeling a wave of exhaustion so total it seems to arrive out of season, disconnected from anything currently happening around them. It isn't disconnected, though. It's late. It's the bill for months, sometimes years, of unpaid emotional labor finally arriving all at once, with interest. And here's a nuance worth sitting with. This pattern gets rewarded constantly, at work, in families, in friendships. Nobody intervenes on someone who's still functioning. Nobody asks the person managing the crisis how they're holding up in the middle of it. Which means the over-functioning performer often doesn't get permission to stop until something forces the stop for them, usually in the form of the exact collapse they'd spent years trying to prevent. Picture the version of this person who organizes the family holiday, covers a coworker's shift without being asked twice, and still answers, "How are you holding up?" with a version of busy but good. Nobody in that scene is lying to you on purpose. They've simply never been given a script for a different answer. Being needed became the evidence that they mattered, and somewhere along the way, needing something back stopped feeling like an option available to them. Now, there's a third group, and this one is probably the most interesting because almost nobody in their life ever finds out it exists. These are the people who don't break in public at all. Not at work, not with friends, not even really with a partner. They break alone, in a car in a parking lot, in a shower with the water loud enough to cover any sound, at 2 a.m. when everyone else in the house is asleep. From the outside, these people look like they never break. That's the entire point. They've engineered their lives so the collapse only ever happens somewhere private enough that no one has to witness it, manage it, or be burdened by it. Researcher John Gottman, whose work at the University of Washington focused heavily on couples and emotional communication, described a related phenomenon he called flooding, a state where a person becomes physiologically overwhelmed by emotion, their heart rate spiking, their capacity for calm, rational thought narrowing sharply in real time. Gottman's research observed that people experiencing flooding often withdraw rather than express what's happening, because in that state, talking feels more dangerous than staying silent. For the private breaker, flooding doesn't happen in front of an audience. It happens in the 15 minutes they've carved out alone between obligations, and then they wipe their face and go back in, and nobody ever finds out it happened at all. And here's where many stories diverge. Because on paper, this looks like the healthiest pattern of the three: no scenes, no burdening anyone, total composure maintained in front of every person who matters. But it's often the loneliest one. Because a feeling that's never witnessed by another person doesn't just go unexpressed. It goes unconfirmed. Nobody reflects it back. Nobody says, I saw that and it made sense. And a feeling that's never confirmed by another human being slowly starts to feel less real even to the person having it. That's the strangest part. The most self-contained version of holding it together can also be the version most disconnected from any actual relief. And that changes everything about how we should think about breaking in the first place. Because most people treat the moment someone finally cracks as the failure, the thing to avoid, the embarrassing loss of control after months of composure. But research on emotional suppression consistently points somewhere else, toward the idea that the composure itself, sustained long enough without any outlet, is the real cost. The break isn't the malfunction. It's the body and mind finally forcing through what should have had somewhere to go all along. It's not weakness. It's information. The information your nervous system has been trying to hand you for a long time, in whatever form finally got loud enough to be heard. And maybe that's the part worth sitting with longest, that the people who seem to be handling everything the best are sometimes the ones running the largest deficit quietly in a currency the rest of us never see them spending. Notice, too, how often these three types overlap inside a single person rather than describing three separate kinds of people. Somebody can be a quiet container at work, an over-functioning performer at home, and a private breaker the one night a week they finally let themselves stop pretending. The pattern isn't a personality type. It's a strategy deployed wherever it's needed by a nervous system doing its best to keep everyone, including the person carrying it, from being inconvenienced. No one told you that you weren't allowed to be weak. They didn't have to. You saw what happened when you were. The room shifted. The energy changed. Someone was disappointed, or uncomfortable, or absent. So you learned. I've written about what we learn in rooms like that, and what it takes to unlearn it. Link in the description and first pinned comment. Now I need to ask you something directly. Think about the last time you felt something big: grief, anger, fear, humiliation, and immediately made yourself smaller so it wouldn't show. What did you tell yourself in that moment? That it wasn't a big deal. That other people had it worse. That there wasn't time. That nobody needed to see it. Where did you learn that? Because nobody is born believing their feelings are inconvenient. That belief has an origin, a room, a person, a moment somewhere back in your life when showing something honest cost you more than it should have. And if you recognized yourself somewhere in this, in the quiet container, in the over-functioning performer, in the one who only falls apart where nobody's watching, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means you adapted, exactly the way anyone would, to conditions that taught you holding in was safer than letting out. That adaptation kept you functional. It may have kept you loved, in rooms where showing too much once felt like a risk you couldn't afford to take. There's nothing shameful in any of that. It was intelligent in its own way, given what you had to work with at the time. But intelligence built for survival isn't the same thing as a life built for connection. And maybe that's really what separates people who keep breaking quietly, over and over, from people who eventually stop needing to. Not that they feel less than everyone else, but that somewhere along the way they find rooms and people where letting it show doesn't cost them anything at all. I'd like to know which one you saw yourself in, the container, the performer, or the one who only breaks alone. Tell me in the comments if you're willing. Sometimes writing it down is the first version of finally saying it out loud. And if something in this described a pattern you've never quieted words for, there's more like this waiting here. The kind of patterns most people carry for years but never see clearly until someone finally names them out loud. Staying around for the next one might be the closest thing to that moment of finally being named. Because the people who eventually stop breaking in silence don't do it by holding on tighter. They do it by finally letting someone see the crack before it becomes the whole wall.